Okay, hello there. I have a little tinkering to do. Let me just see if I can set up the chat window here. There is no hat. Stop it. Okay, I'm getting there. Okay, I'm just setting up all these windows and so I can see you guys there. Let's see, and then also okay. I'm inviting someone else to join in here. We'll see if it works. Okay, I think I'm ready. You can all hear me, right? You can see me and all this kind of good stuff. There's Neslig. Okay, good. So here's what I was planning to do is I thought I would take a few minutes to actually sort of lecture at you. Will I be forgiven if I do that? So,
Yay!
oh, it would help if I put my earphones in so I could hear Neslig over there. So many things to get organized.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, and you can hear me, I presume.
Yes.
Okay, as I was just saying, I'm going to lecture at you guys a little bit. So
Yay.
Forgive me for that. So Neslig asked this really good question about the chordate inversion, the great chordate inversion that occurred, about 700 million years ago. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about that and give you a little bit of background on what the heck we're talking about there. So let me fire up screen share here somewhere. There we are. Okay, I'm going to talk about this stuff. So, can people see that?
Yes, and I think I am familiar with this person. He observed the reversal of the nervous system and the digestive tract in lobsters, I think.
Oh, in lots of things. Yeah.
And all lots of things.
Yeah, this was so Etienne Geoffroy Saint Hilaire was 200 years ago. So we're going way back in time here. And he first proposed this idea that well, first of all, he had a philosophical predisposition to the idea that there was a common unity to all animals on Earth. So he came up with this idea based on an observation he made on things like lobsters and things like vertebrates, that there was this common body plan, that vertebrates were inverted relative to invertebrates or vice versa, but that they're fundamentally the same. So he also, though, suggested that the vertebra was the common unit, and that vertebrates built their bodies around the outside of their spines, while invertebrates built their bodies inside of their vertebrae, which became the exoskeleton. And yeah, I think he went.
Doesn't really work.
No, he went a little too far there. Anyway, there were lots of debates about this. There's some famous debates over about a decade between Geoffroy and Cuvier that really didn't go anywhere because some people thought one side was persuasive, others went for the other side. It all depended on the prior biases. You know, the usual thing with debates, which I've said before, I find kind of useless. Debating the subject didn't help.
Was this pre-Linnaean or after Linnaean?
This would have been, or a little after. So 1820s. Yeah. So, you know, it's an argument that went back and forth. What they really need to resolve this is data, right? So you need data to solve this, not debates.
For those in the live chat watching, yes, I am Dutch. Sorry for my accent.
We'll forgive it. Yeah. Yeah, you have to forgive my American accent then. Okay. So there's another point that, come back. Another point that was made. This was almost 100 years later, though. This is Carl Groban, and he proposed this other distinction that we now consider fairly fundamental. That is protostome versus deuterostome. So early embryos form a hollow ball. Sometimes it's a flat sheet with a space. We're not going to get into embryonic topology, which would just completely lose everyone. But anyway, so they form a hollow ball with an opening on one side. That opening is called the blastopore. In some animals like chordates and echinoderms, that opening is on the side of the future anus. They're called deuterostomes. In others, just like everything else, that opening is at the side of the mouth, and they're called protostomes. So basically what this is all saying is that maybe vertebrates are upside down invertebrates, and they're also flipped back to front, and it's like we're just upside down and backwards. It's very confusing. But still, it's looking at maybe we're seeing the same phenomena going on here. There's something.
So sorry for interrupting, but I think there's another phenomenon, maybe not, or maybe related to this, but I have seen that our brains are flipped with our rest of our body. It's called neurochiasmata, I think.
Yes.
Yes, and there are some hypotheses about how this came about, and basically some of them say that our head turned in a 180 degrees direction relative to the rest of the body, to making this twist in our nervous system.
Yeah, and I'm not really going to get into that, but there's also this interesting phenomena that, you know, for instance, in our brains, it's the white matter on the outside and the gray matter inside, and you go back into the spinal cord and it just flips around, and it's gray matter on the outside. Or did I just flip that around backwards? Anyway, there's an inversion going on from brain to spinal cord as well. So it's I'm not going to really get into that.
Yes.
I'm going to mention that there is some idea that maybe invertebrate and vertebrate brains are not necessarily homologous to one another. In which case it's a moot debate. Okay. So anyway, there's these interesting inversions going on, and as we mentioned with Jouffroy, they're kind of silly, just a debate about superficial things. But the whole thing got started up again in the 1980s, 1990s, when Evo-Devo was just beginning to take off. So at that time, people reminded us of all this stuff. They said, "Yeah, look."
It's a very confusing diagram. But some of the letters are upside down.
That's intentional. Okay. Yeah, you got to rotate the whole image to see. But anyway, it's
yeah, and I get it now. If you look at now, it says analyte and output, and if you flip it upside down, it says chordate invertebrate.
Exactly. Isn't that clever?
Yeah. It's clever. Yeah.
But anyway, this whole thing's getting fired up again in the 1980s, 1990s. There's people like Eddie de Robertis and John Gerhardt, and just about everyone who's beginning to take apart the molecular basis of body plans is asking the same question. Are they using the same signals to build their bodies? We have the tools. Let's look deeper and ask what genes are being expressed in these organisms, and are they homologous? So that's where Gerhardt is coming from. That's where a lot of people are coming from. Really, the 1980s, 1990s, this was a big topic. I would say that now it's kind of settled because, yeah, it's true. Okay.
Yeah, upside down lobsters.
Exactly. So This would be the results of that kind of study of the molecular basis, and this is a little tricky to explain. So these are sort of the same diagrams where you can see that in insects, the circulatory system is dorsal, nervous system is ventral, and vertebrates like us, nervous system is dorsal, circulatory system is ventral. So it, anatomically, this is where Geoffroy is coming from. We look upside down.
Can I make one remark? In the insect, the brain goes from the ventral side to the dorsal side almost.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Oh.
Around the digestive tube, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, although that's partly, this is a question I'll get to in just a moment. It's the relative position of the mouth.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'll come back to the mouth. So just keep that in mind. Right now, I just want to talk about the genes. So it looks like insects and vertebrates use homologous molecules to define their body axes. So in flies, there's a gene called decapentaplegic. I love that name, decapentaplegic, which is DPP for short. And that sets up the dorsal side. In vertebrates, there's a gene called bone morphogenetic protein 4 or BMP4 that sets up the ventral side, which is where the heart forms. So you see they're both, those are homologous genes. They're forming the same structures, but they're on different sides of the animal. Okay, these are homologous genes. Both define the location of the heart, but they're flipped in vertebrates versus invertebrates. Likewise, there is a gene called short gastrulation or SOG in flies, and the role of that is to inhibit DPP and lead to the formation of the nervous system. And meanwhile, in vertebrates, there's a gene product called cordon that inhibits BMP and leads to the formation of the nervous system. So I'm trying to say that in exactly the same way. They're doing similar sorts of things. Genes, you can, for instance, inject SOG into the early frog embryo, and you get induction of dorsal structures, notochord and nervous system. So it's ditto with DPP and BMP4. They have similar effects in frogs and insects. You can do a bunch of experiments where you swap these genes around. You put an insect gene in a vertebrate or a vertebrate gene in an insect, and they do very, very similar sorts of things. They can be swapped from one another. So I think we can safely say that this is settled. The Urbilaterian ancestor was a worm-like creature that lived about 700 million years ago and would have given rise to both the chordates and arthropod lineages. And they used a DPP, BMP-like molecule to define the ventral side and a SOG cordon-like molecule to antagonize that and form the dorsal side.
All right. So, and would antidepressants have worked on them?
Say what?
So would antidepressant have worked on them?
Oh, an antidepressant. Now we're talking about a whole different thing.
It was just a joke.
Yeah. No, when you're at the stage of forming these things, you wouldn't have a functioning nervous system yet, so it's all kind of irrelevant. And as we're going to see in a moment, maybe they didn't have a nervous system at all, or at least not a central nervous system. So you see, it leads to a couple of questions, though. The first is there a stage in evolution where one or the other, the invertebrate or the vertebrate ancestor, had to basically roll over and swim upside down? Was there actually an anatomical reversal? And Gerhardt in his paper says not necessarily. So he suggests an alternative. So his idea is that basically that ancient last common ancestor, the Urbilaterian on the left side, had an ambiguous orientation, that the heart was central, so it's not committed to one side or the other.
The heart, the H, the heart.
Yes, H is the heart. And that the nervous system was relatively undifferentiated with a nerve net, basically.
Like an acelomorph form.
Exactly. So it's more like an acelomorph here. So it's got a nerve net, it's got cords that are ventral and dorsal and lateral. So they're all distributed around the animal. And it's after the two lineages separated that the nervous system developed and coalesced around the SOG cordon side independently in both lineages. In that sense, then, the central nervous systems of chordates and invertebrates wouldn't be homologous. They evolved after the last common ancestor, but the cues they use, the molecular signals they use, are homologous. And I don't know how difficult this is to grasp for people, but you can have a gene regulatory network that is homologous in these two groups, but it's used to generate different tissues and structures in different species. So there's a lot of recycling of core circuitry components to be used in different ways. So for example, insects have a gene called dorsal, and it's homologous to NF-kappa B in vertebrates. And in vertebrates, we use it, for instance, in signaling in the immune system. There are genes like even skipped, which is used in segment formation in insects. And later it's used in specifying regions of the nervous system, specific neurons in the nervous system of the animal. So these things, homology gets tricky when you start looking at this. You know, there's a tissue level, there's the organ level, there's an anatomical level of organization, but there's also a molecular level of organization. And yeah, it can get bewildering when you start dissecting it.
I have a question.
Yes.
I've watched a video made by It's Okay to Be Smart, a really good channel, and they made a video about this, and they point out the acorn worm, which is a deuterostome like us, but it has the same orientation as the protostomes, like the dorsal side and the ventral side flipped with respect to us.
Yeah, no, so hemichordates are really interesting, and it gets you're asking me hard questions. I was kind of avoiding getting into the whole hemichordate thing, but it's actually it actually reinforces what I'm gonna say next. That there was a stage where we probably flipped. Gerhard isn't totally right here, and that the hemichordates give us a good example of ambiguous orientations, because some parts are flipped and others are not, and it gets messy, which is why I kind of avoided it. So why'd you bring it up? No, it's okay. Okay, so I said there's a couple problems that still need to be resolved, and one is, if you look in this diagram right here, you see the M, that's the mouth. What's going on with the mouth? Because if we go back to this other diagram, notice if you compare the two, they're flipped relative to circulatory system and central nervous system, but look, they both have a mouth on the same side. Yeah. So everything rotated except the mouth? What's going on here? This is where it gets really messy, and this is one of the things where hemichordates would help if I bothered to explain them. So insects and vertebrates, one other, except for that mouthing. They both have it on the ventral side, so that's unflipped.
Can you repeat the last sentence, because you broke up a bit?
Okay, so insects and vertebrates are flipped versions of one another, except for one thing. So they both form the mouth on the same side, the ventral side. So the mouth is not flipped. How does that work? And another question might be, which of these two is the upside down version? Are we humans upside down insects, or insects upside down vertebrates? And it turns out that when you look at the mouth, that's kind of diagnostic. It gives us a tentative answer. And to spoil everything, we are probably upside down bugs. Yeah. So one part of this deal is that we're kind of misinterpreting the blastopore when we say it forms either the mouth or the anus. That is a shortcut. That's kind of an abbreviation. And
I have a comment about you saying that we are upside down insects, which is a bit of a difficult thing to explain for intelligent design proponents. Like the intelligent designer one, I already made insect, let me see, how do I make human? Let's flip the insect body plan upside down. That will work.
Exactly. Well, it's also difficult for them, because we are agreeing with Geoffroy that there was a common animal body plan. And what we're seeing is divergence, variation from one or the other here. So it's unity of life. We're all from the same source. We just got our own unique characteristics. Okay, so as I said, we're kind of misinterpreting the blastomere when we say it's mouth or anus. It's something much more fundamental, much more important than that. The blastopore is actually a neurogenic zone. So
Hmm.
in both chordates and insects, it's the location of neural induction. So yeah, look in Drosophila, and what you find is where the blastopore is closing, where things are coming around and forming, that will eventually form the gastrulation zone. That's where the nervous system is formed. And when you look at vertebrates, same thing. Where the blastopore closes is where you get inward migration during gastrulation and induction of neural tissue.
So it's not just that you are just an anus when the blastopore opens.
Well, yeah. And this diagram from Macaulay argues for something a little bit more complicated to explain. That often what you find in organisms is that the blastopore doesn't close as a nice little sphincter-like thing, a little hole that you can correlate with mouth or anus. In many species, for instance, Drosophila, it's actually more complicated than that. It forms a long band, a strip that extends for a substantial length of the embryo. So what's going on here is that the idea that the blastopore in the last common ancestor was this long zone where mouth and anus formed at either end. So it's forming
Ooh.
both.
So, in the ancestral form, the blastopore was both the anus and the mouth.
Yes, it's a complex inductive structure that's forming a collection of tissues. As I mentioned, neurogenesis was an important component of it. Macaulay goes into a great deal of discussion about the induction of the neural stage as well. So it's all tied together, and so it's messier than we like to think. Okay, so it's a long zone, and there is pretty good evidence that this last part of this diagram might be true. So the idea is that in vertebrates, you form mouth at the front end there from this zone, and then in us it rotates, it shifts to a new position on the ventral side. What's the evidence for that, you might ask? Well, I can show you.
I also brought up this picture that I remember vaguely by you mentioning the mouth of the blastopore was both the mouth and the anus in the ancestral binatarian, and this basically portrays it like that. Like you have like a seam that closes in the middle, forming two openings.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, secondarily, in many species, it does form this nice discrete opening. Like in zebrafish, it closes very neatly and forms this little opening down on where the base of it is forming. So it's I think though that's a secondary trait. Okay. Anyway.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Okay. So anyway, the question is, where does the mouth form? And if we look in something like a tunicate, so here's a tunicate tadpole larva. Look at where its mouth is. It's labeled incurrent siphon, but that's its mouth. It's got a dorsal mouth.
Yeah.
So in these organisms, the mouth forms on the dorsal side, which would be homologous to the ventral side of an invertebrate. That's very suggestive. Then, if you look in an Amphioxus, the land slit, you look in the embryo, a curious feature is the mouth doesn't form directly on the ventral side. It forms on the left side. So the embryo is asymmetrical early in its development, and then the mouth on the left side rotates ventrally to form a ventral mouth.
It's very weird.
And so that kind of suggests that, yeah, our ancestor was organized just like our invertebrate cousins, but it then reorganized itself while still at a relatively primitive worm-like stage in its evolution into the anatomical relationships we have now.
So the ancestrals of chordates set their mouth on the top, and later they twisted their head basically to have their mouth on the bottom. Maybe that correlates with the thing that I mentioned previously about our brains being in reverse with the rest of the body, like the left side controlling right side.
Yeah, so there's funny stuff going on there. Now I have to throw in a caveat here in that tunicates are highly derived
Yeah.
chordates. So, you know, this is not necessarily the ancestral condition.
Yeah, I have to mention this before, but do you know Trey the Explainer, the YouTuber?
No, I don't.
Oh, he's a very good YouTuber. Well, although he made one video about neoteny, and he basically uses this the hypothesis that tunicates were our ancestral form, and that our ancestors just went from this tadpole stage from the tunicates. But I corrected him on this because tunicates turned out to be a derived form, not
Yes.
not an ancestral form.
Yeah, this is a problem with many of these analyses, is that we're limited to looking at extant forms. Okay,
Yeah.
we don't have a 700 million year old protochordate to look at. And all of these forms, all these extant forms are derived in one way or the other. So yeah, what the tunicate really tells us is that there is some flexibility in the position of the mouth in chordates.
Yeah,
That's it.
and in the development, we can also see that the digestive system basically goes in a loop, and
Yeah.
and they destroy their brain. Basically, it's very weird.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. So take this with a grain of salt. It's just kind of suggestive that maybe that's what's going on. And
Yeah.
you know, I just have to remind everyone that all of this happened a long, long, long time ago. We're talking about events that
Oh,
were
yeah.
occurred 700 million years ago. That this was long before the Cambrian. It's even before the Ediacaran. We're talking about stuff going on in the late Cryogenian, which you don't hear people talking about much. Some of you may have heard of things like, you know, snowball Earth or slush ball Earth. There was this period with this extensive glaciation in, you know, as you can see in this diagram, we're talking 800 to 640 million years ago. The surface of this planet was pretty darn cold and covered with ice.
Yeah.
There we argue about whether maybe there was a equatorial band of open ocean or whatever. But anyway,
it will be a very good place for fossilization, and also not a very good place for life to proliferate and be big to be fossilized.
yes. Yeah. So just arguing that, you know, animal life would have originated back there in the Cryogenian. That's when we first find evidence of things like sponges, for instance, as the late Cryogenian. So if we're talking about this stuff, we're pretty well removed from forms that would give us direct information. We have to infer everything from embryogenesis and molecular homologies.
And what we have left is basically like a sliver of what was once there during the Cryogenian and the Ediacaran.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's
And now, one question: the bilaterian clade. I think it's the black node right there. The bilaterian.
Oh yes.
Yes. Does it immediately split into protostomes and deuterostomes, or is there another group that isn't within either of them?
There are no surviving organisms in that potential clade that we know of.
Well, I had heard that some groups were not considered either of them, but maybe now, like for example, the acelomorph worms are now considered real protostomes.
Yeah. So there's. But again, even the contemporary acelomorph worms are pretty highly derived. So I'm kind of reluctant.
It's not. Yeah. It's we are really tend to view other organisms as ancestral too quickly.
Yeah.
Like the tunicates, we think, oh, they are very, very simple, so they must have been the ancestral state of our evolution. But no, not necessarily. They are advanced in their own way.
Okay, so that I'm done lecturing at everyone. Let me go back to where I was. There we are. Here we are. Hi again. So, I can stop telling you everything, and you guys can start asking questions. Like Nestle can ask questions too.
Right. I have one question about so what happened to the mouth exactly again? Like for example, in insects, the mouth goes through the nervous system such that the brain eventually ends up ventrally or dorsally. Right. Sorry, dorsally. Yeah.
Yes, and in us, our nervous system is also dorsal.
Yeah.
And initially, the idea, if we go with this tunicate model, initially we would have had our mouths back here, and in principle, then we could have had a mouth going through our nervous system as well. But then it migrated down with the position, and this fit with some of Gerhardt's ideas. And then secondarily, the nervous system evolved to fill in that space.
Hmm.
Yeah. So that is actually an interesting question. Which came first, our ventral mouth or our dorsal nervous system? I tend to think nervous system is probably older in that sense, but if invertebrate and vertebrate nervous systems are not homologous, it gets quite a bit messier to explain.
So I think perhaps maybe of course, our neurons are homologous. The ancestral Euro-Balaterian had neurons, but they didn't have it organized in a system that is now today. For example, the ancestor might not have a central brain, basically, is what you are saying. Yeah.
Yeah.
So basically,
and there's
not.
Another complication that comes to mind is, I'm primarily a cell biologist, and I spent a fair amount of time poking around at neurons. And neurons in insects and neurons in vertebrates are so different from one another.
Wow.
Yeah, that, insect neurons, you have a cell body, and it sends out a branch, and that branch then can bifurcate to form a dendritic tree and an axon that goes elsewhere. When you look at vertebrates, no, you don't see that pattern at all. You have a cell body, and dendrites come directly from that, as well as an axon from a different pole. So when you look at the cells, I can tell the difference between an insect neuron and a vertebrate neuron pretty easily. So there's some substantial differences in how they're cellularly organized, which makes me wonder a little bit too about when that difference emerged.
But would the ancestor have had some type of nervous system, or maybe neurons, at the very least?
It would have had neurons. Okay, so cnidarians have neurons. So we would expect neurons, but cnidarians, for instance, would have more of a nerve net, and they're less discretely, compactly organized into a central nervous system.
Mm-hmm. So if the Euro-Balaterian ancestor didn't had neurons, basically when the group split into protostomes and deuterostomes, our line basically developed a brain independently of the protostome line.
That's one possibility, yeah.
Yeah.
And when you compare the brains of vertebrates with the brains of insects, and yes, insects have brains, they're completely different.
Yeah.
You're not going to find a homologue to a cerebrum in an insect.
Yeah, I'm a bit familiar with how the vertebral brain developed. Basically, with a tube which folds in like a weird way to form these sections of us. Maybe there is something different going on in insects, or probably different going on in insects.
Oh, yeah. Do they? Oh, well, sort of. I mean, what you get in insects is ventrally, the neuroectoderm comes together at the ventral midline and forms a flat sheet. And then what happens is that neuroectoderm folds inward to make a tube. So you could sort of say, well, yeah, they're sort of doing something very similar, but no, the organization is so different. I just can't see a clear anatomical homology between vertebrate brains and insect nervous systems. Molecularly, sure, they've got same. Yes, they have serotonin receptors. Okay. That's what everyone was waiting for me to say. Yes, they do have serotonin receptors.
Did they have chest spots?
What spots?
Chest butts. So I will write it down. Sorry for my accent. Okay.
Anyway, so the rest of you who are here in the chat, feel free to ask questions about anything. I've given my bit here. So
I had one last question, but I forgot to. I remember. Let's assume for a moment that the ancestor didn't have a brain.
Okay.
I am pretty sure that the ancestral did have the PEX9 gene,
Oh, yes.
PEX6, I think. PEX6 for the eye development, I think.
Right.
So the ancestor did have eyes, but it didn't have brains. But how could it use eyes for
Oh, wait a moment. Wait a
anything?
moment. It wouldn't have. It wouldn't necessarily have the kinds of eyes we give as us. Eye spots.
Eye spots, all right.
Yeah, that you could imagine. You could imagine, for instance, it's got it induces PAX6 would induce photoreceptor activity, but it would not have led to image formation. So you would have had an eye that doesn't form an image, so you don't need complex processing to handle it. All you got to do is send out a chemical signal that, hey, it's light out here or it's dark out here.
So basically a behavioral difference, not necessarily a
Yes.
perception of an image, but basically just oh, it's light, now it's time to move on, or now it's dark, it's time to hide in something else, in something dark.
Yeah, it's light out, but there's a shadow moving over us. That's dangerous. Let's get out of here.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, that's so that many different uses of a simple eye-like system.
Oh, so there are embryos for sort of an eye that, a light-sensitive region that can detect the orientation of the embryo, which end is up, where you should form this particular structure. I mean, look at algae. They actually do that. They actually are photosensitive, which you'd expect from a plant.
Yeah.
Or plant-like organism, and they can sprout, things in the appropriate direction because they can sense light.
Yeah. So it's also not necessarily eyes, and so it's just a light-sensitive patch of cells.
Yeah, the whole idea is that if you look at the ancestor, what they've got is they've got the toolkit to lay out a sort of general blueprint for the organism. This is the front end, this is the tail end, this is the genital region, this is dorsal, this is ventral. That's all laid out there. And then what you have is organisms in the descending lineages taking advantage of that information to build appropriate structures for particular regions. So yeah, you put eyes at the head end because that's the direction you're going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay, let me see. Perhaps somebody asked some questions in the live chat. Rational Mind says, talk about gastropods and their weird contortions.
Oh, gastropods are so derived. That's the thing we were talking about earlier. The extant organisms are so heavily derived that it's hard to make comparisons there.
Yeah, I remember seeing that snails have their not just their shell twisted around, but also their internal body, such that their anus ends up above their heads. Intelligent design, everybody.
Yeah, we're weird. Everything's weird. Science is weird.
Question: where would arrowworms be placed? Arrowworms,
ketognaths. Yeah, where do they fit into everything? They're protostomes, for one thing. So, they would protostomes are much more diverse than deuterostomes. So there's all kinds of different organisms hanging over there in the protostome.
Oh,
yeah. So where would they fit in? Oh, that's I'm just going back to that diagram. It doesn't show arrowworms.
And there are also, and the few things that are on our side, the deuterostomes, are also very weird, like the no, not cnidarians, the echinoderms, starfish, and those things. They lost their bilateral symmetry at some point, which is interesting.
Right. Yeah, and ketognaths are also interesting because we split the protostomes into the ecdysozoa or the Lophotrochozoa, so basically insects versus mollusks sort of distinction.
The molting side and the ecdysozoans molting,
Yeah, and then the ciliated feeding structure side. And ketognaths haven't been placed in either one. They're kind of in between, sort of. So yeah, Human taxonomy is arbitrary in some ways, but there we are.
And that they may be in a basal position, but that's also, of course, a bit dangerous because you might think that they might be the ancestral form, but more often they are not, especially when you deal with these groups that are very distantly related.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So, for instance, what am I thinking of? Things like C. elegans, we think they're really primitive worms, but they're probably secondarily, reduced in their structures that they.
C. elegans?
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with those.
Oh, Cenorhabditis elegans, nematodes.
Oh, nematodes, yes.
Yeah.
They are not cnidarians? No, they are not cnidarians, I think.
No, they're not cnidarians.
No.
But they're.
I'm thinking of something else.
Yeah. But you look at them, you see, oh, simple worm, right? They must be ancestral. No, they're not. They're highly derived.
How do you call it? The parasites that humans often have in their digestive tract.
Parasitism does weird things to your molecular biology and your evolution.
What's the name of them again? When you eat uncooked pork, for example.
You're thinking like tapeworms or
tapeworm,
hookworms. There's
are these nematodes?
No, they're a whole different group.
Oh, damn it!
Yeah,
my taxonomy is a bit messed up about it.
Yeah, I'm not a taxonomist either.
I need to take the phone. Be right back.
Okay, that means everyone else gets to speak up. Okay, any other questions? I have just turned off everyone by talking about Evo-Devo, right? You just all run away. You're done. So if you have anything else you want to talk to me about, go ahead. I'm just sitting here. I'm taking a little break. I'm going to go fix myself some lunch in a little bit. And until then, you can ask me anything. Blake would speak up, but he doesn't know how to make the microphone work. What? Oh, well, you think you would have me invited into the chat or the microphone work? Did you want to be in here? Let me see if I've got your email address. Holy crap, I don't have your email address. It's not on the account. Okay. Yes, if you ever want to join in, just send me a group a request and I can add you. Do you think the Xenocoelomorpha grouping will stand the test of the time? Like I said, I'm not a taxonomist, so I don't know. This is not my primary area is taxonomy. I'm mostly a cell and molecular guy, cell biologist in particular. So that's why I mentioned earlier when I look at neurons in vertebrates and invertebrates, I'm just why are we grouping those together as homologous? Because they look so different. Again, looking different is not a good criterion for making these kinds of distinctions. We have to look more carefully at the details in order to make good evolutionary distinctions. We're often fooled by superficial appearances. For instance, in the 19th century, we would have just said worms. Oh, all those worms, they must be a common group, and they're not. There's a lot of different organisms that we would call worms. They look superficially the same, little tube-shaped, torpedo-shaped things that burrow or swim around. Nope. Lots of different phylogenies there. Phrenomythic has a taxonomy background. Okay, yeah, you should be doing all the talking about taxonomy then. And Nelsie is struggling to keep up. No, I didn't lose you, did I? Oh, okay. Yeah, this is something as a teacher I always worry about is I can get caught up in my enthusiasm of the classroom. And am I just leaving all my students behind? Or am I just setting a standard pace that they have to chase to keep up with? Okay, didn't Linnaeus just have a junk drawer called Vermes? Yeah. Vermiform, that's just, It's not a viable evolutionary criterion. It's just a morphology. Okay, if we're winding down, if we have no further questions, maybe I can make this a short one and just end it here. And yeah, I gave you a good dose of basic evolutionary divergence and deuterostomes and protostomes. That should give you enough to digest. This, of course, is also on my blog. So if you have further questions once you've digested it all, feel free to ask there.
All right, I'm back.
Oh, Nestlake is back. He's going to ask more questions, or
Yeah, I'm asking more questions.
Oh, okay.
So I also asked in the live chat with the previous hangout about the unit of selection. Maybe you remember it.
Oh, yeah. Okay, what is the unit of selection? Oh, do we want to have a fight about that? I mean, E.O. Wilson has lately been going on about this group selectionist stuff, that maybe species are a unit of selection, and it kind of bugs me. I don't quite buy it. I don't think that's where selection operates. I mean, you can talk about things like species sorting and sort of that stuff, but yeah, is it a unit of selection? I think the individual is the unit of selection, or in some cases you could actually talk about genes being a unit of selection. I think operate at the level of individual. So yeah.
And are there some cases where you have, like, for example, in eusocial insects like ants and bees, do you have kin selection going on?
That's actually kind of the source of E.O. Wilson's dissent lately, is that the old explanation, the old Hamilton Smith, Maynard Smith explanation would have been, yeah, it's kin selection. That's how you get this sort of thing. But then there are eusocial insects that don't have that same form of genetic inheritance that you see in, for instance, ants and bees. So is that an adequate explanation anymore? And I think Wilson would say, no, there's got to be something more beyond that.
You don't agree with Wilson? Or you agree with Wilson?
Oh, that's a mean question to ask, because Wilson is brilliant. He knows a heck of a lot. He's smarter than I am, and you're asking me to commit and say I disagree with E.O. Wilson, and that's scary. Because I disagree with him in a tentative sense, that I think he's proposing some new ideas that I don't entirely agree with yet, but maybe he can convince me. I don't know.
So at this point, you say that the confident is that it's the individual, the unit of selection.
Yeah, that's where I'm comfortable talking. Individuals as the unit of selection. I think the whole gene-centric stuff that Dawkins promoted, and that many in that European school promoted, it's a valuable way to think about how things evolved. I just don't think it's complete. That yeah. People are coming in late. Don't worry, it's all being recorded. You can go back and review it.
So the Hamilton's rule and also the price equation are not valid explanations anymore?
That's going too far. I mean, I think they are contributory factors. I don't think they're wrong. It's just that they're not the whole story. So they're a part of the story of how things evolve, and I would never discard them. I would consider them, but I think as we progress, we're getting these broader and broader pictures of all the phenomena that go into evolution, and it's more complicated than just being able to come up with a simple formula of relatedness and say, well, that's why this pattern evolves.
Right. It's often brought up when you discuss like altruism with the kin selection and such things. Yeah, basically, if you sacrifice yourself for others, most likely the others are relatives of you, and they have the same, or mostly the same genes,
Yeah,
and that will increase the chances of their survival.
yeah, that old idea of Haldane's, that he'd sacrifice himself for what, certain number of cousins and a certain number of siblings, and so
Yeah, I think she 3 siblings and 6 cousins or something. I don't know the exact number anymore.
No, it's would be 2 siblings and 4 cousins, right?
Yeah, 4
Yeah,
cousins.
and I don't think that's realistic. I don't think that ever happens. That,
No.
for one thing, where there's ambiguity about what is the degree of relatedness to a particular individual in the community. There's a lot of shared genes. I mean, for instance, here I am in Western Minnesota, where there's huge numbers of Scandinavians, and if you just go by degree of genetic relatedness, yeah, that's
Kill everybody.
Yeah. No, we're all related to some degree.
Yeah.
But the other thing is, we don't think that way. That if I see someone drowning in a lake, I don't stop and think, oh, how related is he, before I go in and save him.
Let me check my family tree first.
yeah, and we don't do that kind of equation when we're trying to figure this stuff out. Somebody put, it would be 8 cousins and 4 nephews, and all this. This is not the way brains work, and it's not the way communities work. That for instance, a soldier going off to war is risking sacrificing himself for a larger community than just their relatives. And I think there are factors going on here. Of course, what you would also do is then you could always salvage it by saying, well, yeah, but it's a group selection sort of thing. But again, those people didn't believe in group selection. That what you're selecting for is individuals who will self-sacrifice for a specific community of relatedness, and they're not doing the detailed calculations, but in general, they're working towards a group that would, on average, be of benefit to you.
Yeah.
So
somebody asked, in eusocial insects, would the colony be the unit of selection? That's the same question I asked previously.
Yeah. Now you see, this is we got things we gotta define here. This is where ontology comes in again. What do we mean by unit of selection? What do we mean by colony? What do we mean by altruism? That, in a sense, I am a colony, a colonial organism.
Yeah.
Where trillions of cells and trillions
most of them not even your cells.
Well, most of them are my cell. Oh, you're talking about bacteria too.
Yeah, most bacteria.
Yeah.
In terms of
and
mass,
they are
in terms of mass, most of the
testes.
Yeah.
So in that sense, when I say individual, what do I mean by individual? Is the colony the individual? Show me the boundaries. It's really tough. Okay, we got questions about Jordan Peterson. A friend of mine is liking Jordan Peterson. Help, what do I do? Oh, I'm so sorry for you. I kind of feel like about Jordan Peterson like I do about friends who fall for Ayn Rand nowadays. Yeah, your friend is falling into a cult. How do you deal with my friend who's joined a cult?
Clean your room.
Yes, clean up your friendships and say goodbye to it. No, don't ostracization. If it's a friend or family member, what do you do? I don't know. The best thing you can do is just, I think you do want to maintain the association, but argue with them, try and show that no, they're thinking the wrong way. But that's the thing, is with people like Peterson and Ayn Rand, this isn't a subject for a rational discussion. People are not
No.
going to these philosophies for rational reasons, although they would love to say that it is a
Yeah.
rational decision. It's not. It's an emotional decision.
I have to say I had some of these experiences by myself. For example, I am still subscribed to one of these channels, which really sometimes made a video of how I love Jordan Peterson. And one of the examples he gave was about free speech. Free speech.
Yeah.
And he gave specifically the example of course, the Bill 16 was it, I think?
C-16 in Canada,
C-16,
yeah.
yes. And I'm basically in the comment section, no, the Bill 16 does not say what he says it says. So
right.
basically, and he comes back with some things about like, they are against free speech. No, they are not against free speech, because all the bill does is basically adding these transgender groups to the already existing list. So it doesn't do anything besides that. And he comes back later with, now we have something, what was it again? Let me see here. The definition of harassment. What counts as harassment? Does it count to call a transgender as she or he? And basically no, that's nothing to do with the bill. And eventually, I come back and the video is deleted.
Of course.
Yeah, the video is gone basically at one point, and I'm commenting in another video that he made, asking him why he deleted the video in the middle of our conversation, and he basically says, "Well, I basically called it. It's done."
Yeah. Right. Yeah. The thing is that it's just like, this is something that maybe they can empathize with, is these bills to protect transgender people from harassment are just like bills that say you can't discriminate against atheists, right?
Yeah.
It's not saying that you can't disagree with an atheist or with a transgender man or woman.
Yeah.
It's saying, yeah, you can disagree, but you can't take the next step and say, I'm going to punish them for their ideas. I'm not going to fire you or throw you out. I'm going to sell you a cake, whatever. It is a tricky boundary in that we do allow free thought. We do allow people to think the way they want, but you have to have lines in the sand where you say, no, you can't do harm to people because they think differently than you do.
Yeah.
Oh, and hello, Scientist Mel. Good to see you here.
To add to your point, the right to freely swing your arm ends at somebody else's nose. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and also, that there's no obligation to listen to somebody.
Yeah.
That you can have free speech, but you cannot compel somebody else to listen to you.
Yeah. That hat is a lie.
Yeah. What hat? People keep talking about hats. I don't get it. Anyway. Okay, other questions. Not about Peterson. I can't stand Peterson. He's such an ignorant.
He's a boob. He's a boob.
Yeah. He doesn't understand the science. I don't think he even understands psychology very well. Yeah. I wish we could do what as science communicators? What do you want to do, Scientist Mel? He said, I wish we could as science communicators, but you've got to tell me what. The power of science compel. Yeah. But again, we don't use science communication as something to batter somebody and force them to do something. That ideas should be persuasive on their own. And we just have to keep hammering away and try and explain over and over again.
So we have somebody who likes
tedious.
We have somebody who likes Peterson in the chat.
I'm sorry.
Well, I'm sure he is likable in some respects. We are not there, and nobody is in all respects bad. Not necessarily. So yeah.
Yeah, you know,
But
and again,
yeah,
it's an issue of how do you persuade somebody? And I think Peterson is effective at persuading people about bad science because he's good at appealing to emotional concerns and personal concerns that a group of people have.
yeah.
That he's coming at it from a different direction and he's pulling people the wrong way, but his approach is effective to just like might be effective, persuasive to some people, but it's not necessarily attractive to people sitting in their church pews right now.
Mm.
Yeah. So
Okay,
that's
can I ask a question to somebody in the live chat, or maybe you don't because
yes.
you.
No.
What do you like about Peterson, Lomax? Because every time I ask people, they give the free speech, which is nonsense, because he misrepresents the bill C16. But maybe you are liking bits by something else. I don't know.
That's a good question. What is
Yeah.
what is the approach that Peterson is using that is drawing you towards him?
Also in philosophy, I don't think he has. Maybe some things, but I heard something about his definition of what is true, and basically he says something is true because if it is beneficial to you. No.
Yeah. Yeah, and this could be a general question as well, too. That I've asked this creationists, for instance, why do you defy the science and go in this particular direction? Why are you believing this Jesus stuff? And one problem is that they never give me a straight answer. When a creationist tells me, "Oh well, creationism is true science, it's good science," then I have to say, "No, you don't understand science then." That what you've got is you've got this built-in empathy for science. You think science is a great, virtuous, valuable thing,
Yeah.
but you've inappropriately tagged it onto a religion, which is not science.
Yeah.
And same with Peterson. I think if you make the argument, oh well, I like him for his science, then you don't understand science.
Oh, he said the opposite. He said science isn't what I like about him, but
Yeah,
perhaps something else.
which
I,
is
I don't know.
which is a good thing to say. Okay,
Yeah.
then I don't have
Yeah.
to. Yeah, somebody said kill it with fire.
Yeah. I think the most stupid things he has said is about science, like the lobster thing. But
Right.
and the
And
Bill
the DNA
16,
thing. Yeah.
the DNA thing, I haven't heard about that. That was also DNA, also the DNA thing. I'm
Yeah.
scared to I'm scared to ask.
Yeah. Okay, we got another question. Homology and homoplazy, two extremes along a continuum. Okay, yeah. I think Hall and Meyer are really smart. This is a problem, right? Because you keep citing these people who are much, much smarter than I am. And actually, in that case, I do tend to kind of agree with Meyer.
Well,
Okay,
I had to take the economy because, for example, the wings of bats and the wings of birds are homologous in the sense of being both front limbs, which they have inherited from a common ancestor, and they're also analogous in terms of being wings, because these
yes.
front limbs developed into wings separately. But yeah, so that
Yes.
they are both at the same time.
Yeah, and one of the concerns though is that it doesn't answer the real question. I mean, one question is, okay, are they homologous? But another question is, why do we have this particular structure? So, if you look at limbs and you got one bone here, we got two bones here, then we break up into a chaos of wrist bones, and then we got the phalanges. And that pattern is conserved over and over again in evolution. We don't have the evolutionary language to talk about where did this pattern come from? Why is this pattern consistent? And we just sort of take it for granted that this is the way limbs are, but we don't understand the constraints that generate that particular pattern.
So Lomax has an answer. I do like his position on free speech. Okay, I was right then. But I also
Okay.
like his take on gender roles. I think for the vast majority of people gravitate and flourish in more traditional gender roles. I fully disagree with that.
Yeah.
Fully. Yeah.
Well, you know, I think his position on free speech is incoherent.
Yeah.
He's got to define free speech. And when I listen to Peterson, what I hear is an authoritarian who's trying to tell me this is the right way to do things.
Trying to tell you to clean your room.
Yeah, and he is talking traditional roles. It's a kind of enforcement of traditional gender roles. I kind of agree with Lomax that the majority of people do fit comfortably into traditional gender roles, but that is not an argument
Yeah.
for maintaining traditional gender roles, and is definitely not an argument that says people who don't fall into those roles are somehow wrong or amoral or immoral
Yeah.
or don't belong in society. We should be encouraging things like, diversity of minority opinions.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with having a minority position in gender roles, except maybe it makes it more difficult to find a partner.
Yeah.
Um, but we definitely don't want to be saying, "Oh, well, you're a transgender man. You are the devil," and that just bugs me. Yeah. So
I am fully of the opinion that gender roles are arbitrary. Like that's the construct of human culture, basically. There are lots of different cultures that have completely different gender roles. For example, I think there was a tribe in Africa where the males basically dress up in a flamboyant fashion, where the females pick their partner. They are the opposite, basically, of what happens in the Western culture.
Okay, so we got a clarification. Yeah. It's an argument against purposefully trying to strip away gender roles. Nobody's arguing for that.
Yeah. If you want to be a male, I have no problem with it. But the problem is when you enforce gender roles and you basically say, there are things that you should be doing based on your sex, and which is I think is completely wrong.
Yeah, because for instance, I would say that I am about as conventionally cis heterosexual male as you can get.
Me too.
Yeah, and there's I feel absolutely no threat. There is absolutely no concern that I'm going to be forced into gay marriage or forced to be dressed in a particular way, except by custom and social convention, which is kind of an unconscious bias. But anyway, what I see is a society that's trying to say, you are free to be you. You don't have to conform in a particular way. And you won't be punished. You won't be penalized if you decide that, no, this button-down dress is not for me. I want to go in a different direction. And I think that's great. I would say, whatever makes you happy and doesn't do harm to other people ought to be encouraged.
So basically what I'm hearing, if I hear gender roles, I'm basically hearing there are some things that you are not allowed to do just by convention based on your gender. Yeah. And I find it completely idiotic.
Right. So scientist Mel mentions, I hated that science toys were in the boys section when I was little. Yeah, I have a daughter who is currently a computer science graduate student. And this is a problem when she was growing up too, is we were well aware that we didn't make my daughter happy at Christmas time by going down the pink aisle at Toys R Us, which is now extinct apparently. But we couldn't go down that pink aisle and just pick out something because she had specific tastes. She was not interested in generic girl things. She was interested in things that she, as a girl, as an individual girl, was interested in, which sometimes might overlap a little bit, but other times, no, she went for things like the science toys herself or whatever she was interested in. When she was a little kid, she was interested in language. she's a computational linguistics major, right, or graduate student right now. Do we consider that a gendered subject? I think some people would. Yeah, no idea how to play with Barbies. It was maddening. Yes, there is a way to play with Barbies that the boys also did, which was decapitate them or dress them or undress them, or anyway, yeah, you could use them just like when I was growing up, we were going through this interesting thing where they were coming out with those lines of action figures, the boys' toys. G.I. Joe was initially the same size as Barbie, right?
Yeah.
And we would just call them action figures instead of dolls. And it was this bizarre linguistic game that we played. Yeah.
And Lomax, I see lots of systematic encouragements via school, even medicine, to persuade young boys into transgender lifestyles. What the hell? Often to deficit of child's health. What the? I don't see that.
I don't see that either.
Perhaps in America, but I live in the Netherlands and I have never seen anybody encouraged to be transgender.
I'm in America, and no, I don't. I see exactly the opposite.
Yeah.
That the public schools do a lot of pressuring to fulfill specific lifestyles. Okay, he mentions hormone blockers. Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, hormone blockers are, hormone blockers have specific biological effects. And if you've got somebody who's 10 years old and who's changing all the time, kids are constantly changing, do you do something that's difficult to reverse? I'm less concerned about that, because one thing we know is that even as an adult, you can take hormones and switch all this stuff around.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, sure. You've got this junior high school kid who's pretty convinced that they are a transgender individual, and they ask for hormone blockers to suppress that decision. I am not so concerned about that. I am more concerned with things like, there are, go to text, you will find that there are young kids who are encouraged to go into football and do the reverse. That is, to take human growth hormone, to take testosterone, all these sorts of things, these steroids, to accelerate their masculine development.
Yeah.
Are you just as concerned about those? I am. I agree that there's difficult stuff to decide here, and that kids are malleable and kids are often going to undergo changes in their development. Yeah, I think it's not clear cut.
I have one question to Lomax. Would you have a problem with when in a married couple, like a woman and a father, of a woman and a man, just an example, instead of the traditional gender role where the man goes at work and the woman stays at home cleaning and cooking and everything, you have the man staying at home and the woman going at work. Not because they are forced to do that, because they have to just decide on their own when they got married the woman has just a nice job and the man is unemployed. So basically they have to just decide on their own that the man stays at home, does all the cleaning and cooking, and the woman goes to work. Would you have a problem with that, Lomax?
Yeah, he also says, surely you don't medicate young children for a political agenda, though. Define political agenda. I mean, in a sense, everything is political. I would medicate children for concerns they have that make them unhappy.
So Lomax doesn't have a problem with. Okay, then she drop the gender role if you don't have a problem with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, gender roles are political. Yeah, there's just no way around it. But they're also a matter of personal happiness and social environments and community. And yeah, we're talking about a fraught issue. It's really complicated, right? So it's tough. Scientist Mel mentioned some parents put their young daughters in the pill, and there are issues with that. And some people do have issues with that. There are people who have issues with the HPV vaccine, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Political.
oh yeah, very political, but it's a disease. It's a virus. We can actually have measurable improvements in people's lives with reduction of things like cervical cancer with the HPV vaccine.
Let the parents decide whether to help the kids with their health or not. So,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And, okay. Yeah. And like things like the pill. Are you putting your child on the pill because you're pushing them to engage in sexual activity? I would say there you're getting into some difficult issues that maybe you shouldn't be pushing your child into this. Are you putting them on the pill because the child specifically asked for it? Okay, why are they asking for it? And there are, there are other things that you treat with a pill, like difficult menstruation. That pills can be very helpful that way. So maybe that's a good reason. Some people get migraines during menstruation that are crippling, and the simplest thing you do is treat them with a pill, and this serious debilitating problem goes away. But yeah, if you have this vision that your daughter is going to be sexually active at 13, or she's not a good liberal, that's just as wrong as saying your daughter is not going to be allowed to have sex until she's 30 and she has to go to a purity ball with you. Those are both bad things.
Lomax says, no, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to force people into gender roles. I am concerned they are being encouraged to push themselves into roles where they are less happy. And I would agree with that, but that is not what you were previously saying. You were previously saying that about gender roles, and Peterson is somehow promoting that idea, and you have just disagreed with that basically when you were saying you're okay with a woman going to work and a man staying at home, do all the cooking and cleaning. So if you are concerned that people are being pushed into roles where they are less happy, then again drop the gender role concept. It's really simple. It's really simple.
Yeah, so there with medication, they can have side effects, they can be scary, and yeah, again, that's a matter for rational assessment.
Yeah,
if somebody wants to be on the pill and they take the pill and they discover that the side effects are so bothersome that they don't want to be on it anymore, yeah, then you say, yeah, okay, we're not going to give you the pill anymore. This is a personal decision. And again, it's not ideology that's deciding it, except on the other side, where they're trying to dictate that traditional gender roles must be followed, no matter what the preference of the individual concerned.
So just like Crypt Ike says, you're concerned that people are pushed into roles and gender enforcement. Period. Yeah, right. Exactly.
Yeah, we're talking about this idea of free speech and all that. People have to be free; they have to have liberty to make their own choices. And what we've got is on the left, we got people saying, yes, we should have lots of liberty. We should make all these choices that individuals should make a decision about, for instance, gender roles, how they dress, what kind of surgeries they undergo, what kind of healthcare they get, everything. And it's the other side that is hiding behind this banner of free speech that is doing exactly the opposite and saying, no, you shouldn't do that, that it's bad to have that kind of liberty.
Also, Lomax is saying it's not simple if men typically gravitate to STEM and women typically gravitate to caring. But that's not the case, because nowadays, especially in progressive nations, a lot of women go to STEM fields. Then it's just that in these where progressive ideas doesn't get much traction yet, this asymmetry is coming up often.
Okay, and then we have this other point. It's not simple if men typically gravitate to STEM and women typically gravitate to caring.
Yeah.
Why do they do that? I mean, that's the question we have to ask. and it's social pressures large. It's not like there's something biologically inherent in
Yeah.
women that make them run away from math and science. Because one thing we've been discovering is as we've shifted our education, if we become more tolerant of encouraging, exploration of these ideas, what we find is more and more women going into science
Yeah.
because science is cool and fun and exciting. So, for instance, at my university, when I teach in science classes, it's something like 60-40 female male. And sometimes it's up to 70-40. And it's not as if, they're just taking the easy courses. This is
No,
true of the
no,
upper
no.
level. No, it's the upper level electives where we're doing more and more math and everything. And that difference is consistent, that we're seeing more women in biology. Um, we're,
Lomax is saying when allowed to make their choices in the most egalitarian countries, they in the world they diverge. No, they don't. They actually converge to
yeah.
much equal distribution, basically. For example, in Iceland, where they have paternal leave for both the men and the women, we see that both take turns in taking care of the child. When in other countries, like for example the United States, the most often the woman stays at home and the man goes at work when they have a child. Yeah.
And there are some fields where you still see a gender imbalance, in the other way. For instance, physics and computer science are still heavily dominated by men. But we're here at my university, for instance, the computer science department has a majority women faculty, and it's not simple. It's not like all of a sudden we got more women. What we see is greater variability now, that some years we get more women coming in, some years we get more men coming in. But it's a phenomenon that there are so many pressures besides just, is it available to you? That there's a lot of social pressure that's saying, girls, you will do this one thing. Parents and grandparents are still pushing them into the pink aisle at the toy store. There's communities of peers who also have these ideas that, and this is true also on the boys' side, that I remember growing up when being old Four Eyes or a bookworm or that nerd was scowled at and scorned, and you weren't quite as good a boy as the other boys.
You're not a real man.
Yes, and we still get a lot of that, and that's unfortunate.
I remember a conversation I had with family members a very long time ago, when I was like 10, I think. We discussed a hypothetical situation. For example, if you imagine a person just randomly throw a bottle of water on you in a bar, would you hit that person? Oh, at the time I was like of course a child. I would say yes, but now I was more gravitate to a more less violent solution. But back then I would say yes. And then the person asked, well, what if the person was a woman? And I would say then, no, it doesn't matter to me if it was a woman or a man. I would react the same thing. And then they say, would you? How dare you? Women are weaker than men. You wouldn't dare to hit a woman the same way as you would to a man. So, and I was shocked by that comment, basically.
Yeah. So it's all in your genes, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So scientist Mel points out that she only recently learned about Hovind. Oh man.
Recently.
Yeah, you are so lucky.
Yeah, you're exactly. You are lucky to find.
Yeah. When I came to the University of Minnesota Morris, which was in 2000, so about 18 years ago, I was teaching cell biology, and the first thing I encountered was all these posters on the bulletin boards around the science building, where there was a Christian pastor openly advertising that you could come to his special tutoring sessions and learn how the cell biology professors were lying to you. Yeah. And he would teach you about creationism. And the way they would show Kent Hovind videos, which are, I don't know, if you ever want to really facepalm hard, just watch some of his videos. He's terrible. But this actually comes full circle back to something earlier. I consider Hovind to be just simply awful, just really terrible, and I think he's a terrible lecturer. But there are people he reaches. They're like Peterson. He's incompetent at the science, but he's got something that just catches people. And so you'd find these people who are really enthusiastic about Kent Hovind, and I'm sitting there wondering why. He's wrong about everything, and he's not presenting the matters intelligently, and he's also throwing in all these racist jokes, and some people like that.
Yeah, I learned Kent Hovind when I was like how old was I? 17 or something like that for the first time. Basically, also it was a youth. I was looking on YouTube like for evolution videos because I was interested in back then, even then. And I got across with a 2-hour video of Kent Hovind explaining why evolution is stupid. Basically, yeah. And I watched a good portion of the video, but eventually I was like, "Oh my God, why you are so wrong and you are so lying so often? Why are you not in jail?" And more reached on it, "Oh, you are in jail." So yeah.
Yeah, but he was effective. I mean, because for instance, we still got G-Man and True Empiricism and all the creationists on YouTube who are making exactly the same bullshit arguments over and over again. They're coming straight out of Hovind's school, and it's absurd.
So Lomax asked another question: is masculinity, physical strength, not a virtue? No, I would say not.
Yeah, because I don't consider myself a physically strong person.
Me neither.
I guess I'm an inferior specimen.
Yeah, you should be naturally selected out from the gene pool.
Yeah, I'm not going to have any children. Oh wait, too late.
No.
Yeah.
Sperm cells are too quickly to act.
Yeah. And what again, we're getting into these ontological things. What is virtue? What do we consider virtue?
Yeah.
It's like, is a football player more virtuous than a school teacher? They're different. They're doing different things. Let's have some respect for the variation that we find in the human population, that we all have to, this is another thing that bugs me about the right, is the American right in particular, is this whole idea of the rugged individualist and how everything is about, being able to live alone on your own and kill a muskrat and eat it with your bare teeth or whatever. And humans are social animals. That what is the greater virtue is, I think, forming communities and working together with a tribe to do great things. Science is a great example of that, because science does not progress by the advantages of the individual. Science is very much a community activity where we rely entirely on all this greater group of people, and communicating and sharing ideas and building on past ideas. I think that's one of the reasons why you find so many scientists are of the liberal persuasion, is because they know from their experience how much greater progress is when you work together rather than as individuals.
Yeah, but also let's also remember that there are also a lot of pseudoscience and anti-science in the quote-unquote liberal side, like anti-GMO and anti-vaccines. Oh, of course, there are also those people on the right side. But these things are a lot of the hippie and the naturalist. Mother Nature. What are they doing science? Yeah, these are often found on the left side of the political spectrum.
Well, yeah, and it's true. You can go too far the other way.
Yeah.
Okay. And I would say moderation in all things. One of the problems in America right now is moderation is defined as something way, way over on the extreme right, and that's not where it belongs. Sex between queer women has the lowest rate of STD transmission, so lesbians are God's chosen people. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, if you again, it's that definition thing. If you're definition of a virtue is a reduction of disease, a reduction of biological harm, then yeah, you could make that kind of argument.
Yeah. That remind. Oh, so go ahead. Sorry.
And you know, that would also argue then, of course, that celibacy is even more virtuous than lesbianism, because you're not going to inherit any sexually transmitted diseases at all.
It reminds me about something that came up on television. I don't remember for what, but they argue because the Y chromosome of males is so reduced, and some people think it keeps reducing it. Eventually, males are gone in the future, and basically the females are left, and they need to artificially inseminate themselves to keep going.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's not true, of course. I don't think that's the case. But perhaps it will be a virtue if we want to reduce the STDs.
Yeah. Oh, another comment is that masculinity is a collection of things, and I agree that it's not only a collection of things; those things change all the time.
Yeah.
So I had to make a trip to visit my son yesterday, and I drove to St. Cloud, and pro-life across America is going nuts again. There's billboards everywhere. Oh. And one of the interesting things I noticed is they're shifting their strategy a little bit. And what I saw all over the place were these signs targeted at men saying things like, real men love babies.
Oh my God.
Yeah. And so they're, you know, this is a case of virtues in flux, right? Because once upon a time, they were all targeting women and saying how babies are, you know, fetuses are babies, they're real human beings, they're all this sort of thing. And nowadays, I'm seeing this different shift, which is trying to say, okay, we are going to appeal to male virtues, and the male virtues are empathy, sympathy, child rearing, loving babies. You know, when I was growing up in the 60s, that would not have been a...
I thought that it was the female virtues. So they basically flipped the story, basically. They realized, oh, the females no longer are being fed up with being forced to be pregnant. So now we are going to put these virtues on to the men.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That sounds almost human. Yeah, that sounds, yeah, it's...
It sounds almost human.
Yeah, you know, it's a male virtue to be inhuman. At least according to Peterson, I think. Most of the people I see locally protesting outside Planned Parenthood are geriatric individuals who cannot have babies. Yeah, there's a bunch of furious, angry old people who are doing this. And also, I know a lot of people who are escorts, working as, you know, escorts at Planned Parenthood to get patients past those geriatric screamers. And I've seen that a lot of those are women.
Yeah,
we need more men to participate in that sort of thing. We do not have a Planned Parenthood in Morris, or I would be there. What we have instead are those fake centers to advise women on pregnancy, which have no doctors, no pediatricians, nobody. They're just there to discourage you from abortion. Oh, another different question. Do you think new atheists focus too much on religion? I like your general science information and correcting a bad global crisis science. You know, new science, the new atheists are so passé. We're abandoning that mode of thinking now. There's fewer and fewer new people calling themselves. I've stopped calling myself a new atheist. And I think, you know, I think there's an appropriate focus on religion, which is that religion is bad. But I think what turned me off is that increasingly it has become one kind of religion is bad. That is the Islamic religion. And they ought to be more like Christians. I disagree with that very strongly.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of atheists leaving the anti-religion, or not necessarily anti-religion, but criticism against religion, and more towards the anti-SJW shit.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a reporter just contacted me to do an interview about exactly that. And yeah, I'm going to be talking with him tomorrow about this shift that's going on in the atheist movement, where we're getting away from, you know, let me just, I have to qualify that. There is an atheist movement. Is the atheist movement itself changing? In a lot of ways, the atheist movement had this attitude for a long time, but we had these prominent spokespeople who were not fitting with the general populace. And I think it's led to a lot of dissatisfaction with the atheist movement, which is kind of unfortunate.
Yeah. I'm seeing Lomax with another comment. But isn't the protection of children part of the traditional male role, performed in a different way to the feminine, men being the protectors and women being the nurturers? I don't see a contradiction, but didn't you just say that you don't like people being forced into roles? That is what you are doing right now. So you are contradicting yourself. Are you okay with people choosing their own roles, whether or not they are traditional?
Yeah, and what do you mean by protectors? What are we men supposed to protect babies from? Saber-toothed tigers are extinct. We don't have to worry about that. There's, you know, that when it comes to, you know, I just last week I spent a week with my grandson, and there was absolutely no difference in what I needed to do versus what my wife and the baby's mother was supposed to do. That what we had to do was take turns, you know, holding a crying kid or entertaining the kid or changing diapers or feeding them. These are the roles of a parent.
Yeah. To try to take a baby away from a mother.
Where I said with my fists, "Don't you dare come near my grandbaby." That just does not happen. And so I think there's an attitude that, oh yeah, we're supposed to be manly and protecting children, but really mothers do that too. Mothers will fight off the saber-toothed tiger that tries to eat a baby just as much as the man would.
Yeah. Try to take away a baby from a mother, and you will your eyes will disappear very soon.
And what about single moms? Yeah, I agree, Scientist Mel.
Yeah.
Single
fathers, even single fathers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That here's somebody who's got all the roles, and we don't make that distinction. It's not as if the Republican right is sitting there funding greater, you know, money to mothers so that they can be freed up from this necessary job. So we can, let's talk the Republicans into giving single moms more money so they can hire bodyguards.
Yeah. Also, I would like another question to be answered by Lomax. Are you okay with gay couples having children? Because if you are adhering to these gender roles, then you cannot be in favor of these gay couples having children, because that's a contradiction.
Yeah.
And these gender roles are often used to enforce this anti-gay marriage, because marriage is a unified contract between a man and a woman, and they have different roles that are laid down by the Lord on high, basically.
Okay, Carter Manser also makes a point that a lot of traditional societies hand off childcare duties to servants in any case, or if you go back to hunter-gatherer societies, they handed off childcare roles to a community.
Yeah,
that childcare was considered a group activity. Again, often it was, you know, in many societies, it was a group of mothers who worked together to do this sort of thing. But I think it's positively criminal that what our society does now is tell single mothers that you are going to go it alone. I can't imagine being a single mother. You know, like I said, I went off to visit my granddaughter, or my daughter-in-law, to help take care of my grandson. And the reason we did that, and the reason my wife is still staying there, is because my son got shipped off to a training exercise.
Yeah.
And we just could not imagine being alone with a 6-month-old baby and having to take care of it all by yourself for 6 weeks.
Ooh.
That is grueling. You would get no rest at all. That, yeah, the village raises the child. I think it's true. And too often we have our families broken up so that we can't do that. You know, I'm in a profession where, as a scientist, you don't get much choice in where you end up. You go where the job is, And that meant that throughout my child rearing age, it was me and my wife alone living hundreds of miles away from grandparents or cousins or uncles who could help. And I think that makes it a lot harder.
Yeah. Also, I want to ask this on another question. I have seen a lot of documentaries about the ancient hunter-gatherer societies, and they are often depicted as only the men hunt and the women stay at home. Is there anything true about that? Do we have evidence of such a distinct gender role society or tribal structure?
Yeah, what I've read of anthropology, it does. Yeah, males often resort to the role of parasites. I don't know if that was
Oh
true
yeah,
in an evolutionary sense, but yeah, the men do have a role, and that is hunting, and they do a lot of well, not a lot of that, but it's like every few days you'd go off on a long trek to go find game, and then you come back and you lord it over everyone because you brought back this nice chunk of meat, and
yeah.
you live it up.
I think the majority of their calories comes from collecting nuts and fruits
Exactly.
and also clever fishing and such. That the things that take little energy and occasionally they would have the opportunity to hunt very big game.
Yeah.
Very few times.
So meat is this special high calorie rich nutrient get sporadically. And mostly what you're living on is tubers and vegetables and fruits,
Yeah.
which are often gathered primarily by the women. So yeah, yeah, like Ilium says there, most of the nutrition intake comes from gatherer activities because
Yeah.
hunting was rarely successful. But
Yeah.
hunting was glamorous and prioritized and gave you status because it was such a wonderful treat to come back with.
Yeah. I think that the smart ones would say that okay, now we know during this time of year there are not a lot of animals out there. They have migrated somewhere else. So now we're just going to
Yeah,
gather a lot of food to stay alive during the winter, for example.
yeah.
Even the men would do that. I don't think the men would be stupid enough to go every day on a hunt. I think that it's
Yeah, who's Evo
counterproductive.
Psych? Oh, I
Yeah,
think we're wandering away from Evo Psych and trying to get away from the simplistic, you know, evolutionary roles that Evo
yeah.
Psych tries to assign to people. That it's one of my complaints about evolutionary
Yeah.
psychology.
I don't think we have evolved to have a specific behavior. I think we have evolved a brain that is able to adapt to different situations. For example, if you suddenly go back to a hunter-gatherer society, people would quickly learn to to adapt their own behavior to go to another set of
Yeah.
behaviors.
Okay,
It's also yeah.
Lomax says that his dad protected his family in hard times. I'm curious, how did he protect you?
Hmm.
But what specifically? I mean, when I was growing up, my father was played an important role too. He was stuck in the job of he was often working two jobs at once to provide food for the family. But then my mother was doing most of the childcare and doing all the cooking and that sort of thing. So how do you distinguish protection from nurturing? I considered my father very nurturing. Maybe he'll answer. You just detailed this. How did you detail this? What, did I miss something? I'm looking. I don't see it.
Chefs breaking the windows and the like. I think
Oh, so
he,
you
he he barricaded the entire house.
okay? And those chavs were men and women, or what was his role to protect the family from other men? Because that's problematic too. Yeah, and I my family was pretty much dirt poor, and I lived on the wrong side of the tracks. I wouldn't say we lived near a crack house because that was in the 1960s. But anyway, yeah. And my grandmother on my father's side, for instance, my grandfather died as a young man and left her with 6 kids. So she was a single mother, and I had a lot of respect for her. She really worked hard to do this. Yeah, and Cartomancer says, what is it about protecting and nurturing that is so specific that only one gender would benefit from? I'd ask the same thing. How do you define protect versus nurture?
And I'm still confused. Like in one sentence, you say that you have a problem with people enforcing others into specific roles, but now you are doing the exact same thing with the men are protecting and the women are nurturing. I don't get it.
Yeah, I think the only sense in which men are more useful as quote unquote protectors is that we live in a culture that is biased. So we tend to think of men as a problem that needs to be defended against, and furthermore that men are more intimidating than women. Again, that's a social distinction, a cultural distinction. Yeah, Lomax isn't a sort. Yeah, I know what that is. I've heard of those things. Poor area with little police presence. Yeah, when I was growing up, we didn't see the police much either, and if we did, we ran. So I understand that.
Scientist Mel, I scare men a lot.
Yes, you are very intimidating.
Yeah, especially having the smarts.
Yeah.
G-Man is pissed about her being smarter than him because he cannot stand, especially women being smarter than him.
Yeah.
And it isn't really hard to be smarter than G-Man.
Oh, that's just mean. But I agree completely with you. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Have you ever seen a dog turn into a non-dog? Yeah, that is his go-to question.
Yeah, and I think there's also a sense where men take advantage of another social convention that is if you're loud and arrogant and aggressive, you are stronger, and it's not always true.
No.
And G-Man is really working that attitude, and I don't think it helps him.
Yeah, but it's quite funny because I don't know. Do you know Fiona Robertson? There is one fellow YouTuber, or not necessarily YouTuber, but a fellow in our community on G+. And he's like a very a bit old lady, and you wouldn't think she's strong, but she beat G-Man in an arm wrestling contest. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, nice old lady with a bit of wrinkles, and she beat G-Man in an arm wrestling contest. At least so I have heard. I don't know if it's true, but I think based on the source, I think it's pretty true.
Yeah, and have you seen the thing going around where there's this woman NRA member is asking David Hogg, who, what does she call him, Old Twig Arms, to arm wrestle him about gun control, as if
okay, you can beat me at arm wrestling, so what? That doesn't mean you're
yeah.
Basically, are you trying to do a dick measuring contest? Because that is pretty ironic.
Yeah, that would be an interesting thing. You show up to arm wrestling and you just say, no, we're gonna measure penis size right now.
Yeah.
And that will determine who is right. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
No, it doesn't work. Oh well. Okay, we've been talking almost 2 hours now.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's fine. I just worry that we'll break people's patience. So maybe this is a good point to wind it up. Anyone have any last question?
I had one, but I think it's pretty complicated to go into at this point.
Well, I'm planning to do this weekly, so we can do it again. So
I will ask a question, but if you think it's too much, so we won't go in there, and then you could decide. Okay. There are two hypotheses about the evolution of insect wings. Like there's one hypothesis about the wings evolved from the gills of aquatic hexapods, or there is something else going on. I do not remember the other hypothesis. So what do you think?
Oh, you're talking about Kukalova-Peck's hypothesis that when you look at things like mayflies, you also find other things, and you find these phenomena like they have these little branches coming off, and developmentally, of course, it's pretty clear that wings evolve from biramous appendages that we see in crustaceans, for instance. So I think I'm all for that. I think that's perfectly reasonable. There's good evidence. There's good fossil evidence. There's good developmental biology evidence. There's good molecular evidence. I'm going to go with that.
Yeah, it's pretty weird because I've seen that the fins of fish evolved from a gill arch, a hind gill arch, I think, or maybe something similar. No,
I don't see that at all. No,
I've seen it. I was going with it. Vertebrates developed wings from limbs and limbs from fins and fins from gills, but maybe that's not necessarily true.
No,
but insects did it all in one single step, basically.
Yeah, no, I think vertebrate limbs are a true evolutionary novelty. But yeah, let's talk about that some other time.
All right. Yes.
Scientist Mel asks, "Can I pop in sometimes and do a chat?" And yes, I would love to have you on again sometime. So yeah, or I can come talk to you on your channel, whatever. I remember I said earlier that science is about communication and about networking and linking together with all these different people. So I'm all for that. Okay, so let's wind her up there, and thank you all for asking good questions. And we'll talk to you again sometime.
And thank you, PZ, for answering the questions.
Oh, thank you for asking good questions. That's half the equation. Okay, so we'll talk to you all later.
Bye, everybody.
Goodbye. I'm going to go have lunch.